Welcome back to another boardroom briefing. I am your host, Paul Maskill, and today we're going to talk about one of the most misunderstood numbers in business, and that is EBITDA. Everyone has heard this a million times in the last 5 years as everyone's talking about buying and selling businesses. But what we're going to dive into specifically is why EBITDA often lies to the owners and why buyers are not falling for it. So if you ever have interest of selling your business and knowing what your business is worth, I think this episode will be very valuable to you. It matters because a lot of owners use EBITDA as proof that the business is doing better than it actually probably is. They hear a percentage, they see an adjusted number, they compare themselves to what they think a healthy company should produce. They talk to people at conventions and trade shows and all that kind of stuff. And over time, the number starts to feel like truth. But EBITDA can create a false sense of security when it is misunderstood, over-adjusted, or disconnected from the actual economic and financial reality of the business. So in this briefing, we're going to walk through the illusion owners have around EBITDA, what buyers actually look for, and why EBITDA can be misleading. And lastly, of course, what are the disciplined operators doing differently? So here's the illusion. If EBITDA looks decent, the business must be healthy. That's what we tell ourselves. Most owners don't misuse EBITDA because they're trying to mislead anyone. They misuse it because it sounds sophisticated. They don't totally understand it. It gets used in deals, and it feels like the number that proves our business's quality. How strong is our business? And we're always going to look at EBITDA. So the internal thinking often sounds like this. We're doing 10% EBITDA, or our EBITDA is improving year over year, or we're on a run rate of a $2 million EBITDA company. If we clean up a few things, our EBITDA will look even better. Buyers care about EBITDA, so this must mean the business is strong. And on some level, that is totally understandable. It is a real metric. EBITDA does matter, and it's one of the numbers buyers care about. It's usually one of the first numbers buyers see. But the dangerous part is that owners often treat it like that is the only objective truth, when in reality it can be highly distorted. Every business's books are different, and it is an illusion. It is an illusion because it sounds financial. EBITDA sounds financial. It must also be reliable, but it isn't always reliable. So why can it be misleading? It can be misleading in a few common ways. One, the most important thing, in my opinion, is it gets separated from cash reality. So the number one thing that we focus on as fractional CFOs is creating consistent positive cash flow. And a lot of times owners, business owners, can show a respectable EBITDA, but they're still struggling with cash flow. And that happens when owners forget that EBITDA is not cash. It does not directly reflect the debt service that you're paying, capital expenditures, if we're buying vehicles, if we're paying down vehicles with that debt service, any working capital pressure, owner dependency, to be honest, because a lot of times our business will be super dependent on the owner, which means our EBITDA is probably stronger. But if we had to replace the owner, our EBITDA would be much lower. And then any timing mismatches in the business, the way cash is flowing through the business. So an owner may point to EBITDA and say, look, the company's healthy, while day-to-day financial reality says otherwise. It's stressful. Making payroll is always a grind. We're not sleeping well at night. There is no predictability and there is no clarity. So that's the number one issue, that EBITDA gets separated from cash reality. Number two, our adjustments become a story instead of a standard. And this is another big one. If you aren't totally familiar with it, it's always adjusted EBITDA. Owners often normalize EBITDA with the belief that they are presenting the quote unquote real number. And let's be honest, some adjustments are legitimate, but once they become too aggressive, EBITDA stops being a metric and starts becoming a narrative. The potential buyers, the banks, are really going to start questioning everything once they see add backs that become too aggressive. Things like adding back too many expenses, treating recurring inefficiencies in the businesses. Oh, that was just a one-time expense. We had to do that one thing one time, but it was really just covering up inefficiencies for a significant period of time. Removing costs that are actually part of how the business operates. And you can convince yourself anything of like, oh, if someone else bought this business, they wouldn't need that. But that's probably just not true. And then the last thing we assume is that a buyer is going to see the business the same way the owner does. Here's the facts. That is not true. The owner has emotional ties to it. It's their baby. A lot of times they started it. And in their mind, they've worked so hard and put in so many hours, but the buyer doesn't care about any of that. And that's when owners start believing a number that a buyer will probably never believe, and they're always going to discount. So that's number two. Number three is it hides the fragility in the business structure. If you're running a $5 to $8 million business, that's a fragile business. You lose a couple technicians. We have a couple bad months, and all of a sudden our cash flow goes down significantly. A business may post decent EBITDA while still being fragile because margins are not consistent. Our labor is not super efficient. They're not closing great, or our call booking rate's not great. Our reporting's super messy. Our accounting is really messy. I see books every single day for companies in the $5 to $8 million range, and their accounting is usually a disaster. Unfortunately, the owner doesn't know it because the owner doesn't know what they don't know when it comes to financials. The other thing that makes it fragile is the owner is still carrying too much of the business. Even if they're not working in the business 24/7 like they were when they started it, they're usually very dependent from a decision-making standpoint. A lot of things still run through the owner. They're still the bottleneck. And what I've realized too at this point is the company needs like constant 100% effort just to hold things together. It's a constant grind. It never feels like things are running, without the owner. Things are on autopilot. Cash is consistent. Profitability is predictable. It feels like it's a constant effort just to hold this thing together. So the EBITDA number may look fine while the business itself is truly not that durable. And that matters because buyers are not purchasing spreadsheets and numbers and financial reports. They are purchasing a confidence in the predictability of future earnings, future cash flow, on what will this asset produce if I take it over. So that's really what's happening with the EBITDA and hiding the fragility in the structure. And usually, what do the buyers actually see when it comes to this? They're not going to ask what numbers in the, how proud are you of this business? What are you proud of? And it's all the emotional things that the owner's tied to. But the buyer wants to know, how durable are these earnings? How transferable is this cash flow? If I took it over and you disappeared, would this thing continue to produce? How much cleanup or stabilization is required after close from an operational standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, from a financial standpoint? Again, is the owner the bottleneck? And then how much of this EBITDA is actually real, repeatable, and trustworthy? And that is when you start asking those questions and you remove your emotions, you remove your ego, and you remove your excuses, and you get real with yourself, sometimes those answers aren't answers that we love. So that gap is really where a lot of disappointment lives. We have this number in our mind, we're running our business, we think it's worth this, and then all of a sudden we start talking to the market, to M&A advisors, brokers, whatever it might be, and then we realize this business isn't as healthy as we thought it was. So why do owners get burned on this? A lot of owners only realize EBITDA was misleading when they test the market or enter that real due diligence process. And that's what I just alluded to, going through the M&A process, going through the broker process, talking to PE, talking to potential buyers. Up until then, the numbers feel reassuring. But once a serious buyer gets involved, and I see a lot of owners get frustrated with this, they might get a really cool, exciting, life-changing offer. And then once the buyer starts doing due diligence, they're going to realize that the margins probably aren't stable enough. The ad backs are too aggressive. The owner dependence changes the quality of the predictability of the earnings and cash flow of this business. The overhead structure makes cash flow less reliable. A lot of times when someone is selling a business, they don't have as much office payroll as the next buyer will need. And the people in the field are just used to the existing owner, and their earnings predictability and what's going to be produced out in the field is just not as durable. Suddenly, the owner is not dealing with the value they imagine. They're dealing with the value a buyer is willing to defend. Now, even in this crazy frenzy of buying and selling, people are overpaying, yes, but they're only going to overpay for a business that can produce consistent, predictable profits, cash flow, EBITDA, all the things that we're talking about in here. So the consequence of this, the real danger is, when it's misleading, is not just creates bad valuation expectations, It also creates operating complacency. When we believe in our mind that this business is doing better than it actually is, we're kind of complacent when it comes to running it. We don't want to put in the work to put in, pricing changes, labor cleanup, systems that we need, overhead discipline, proper leadership in place. And we think, well, if we can just sell this thing, it's going to be okay. Report all the things that go into running a successful business that can run without the owner, because the number is telling them that they're in a better position than they actually are. And a lot of times we don't know that until we go to market, start going through the due diligence process. Potential buyers start digging in with a fine-tooth comb, and they realize this business is actually pretty fragile. And that's why this false confidence is so expensive. We might think our business is worth 10 million, and then we talk to a broker, M&A advisor, PE group, and we realize it's only worth 4. And talking to a lot of professionals in that space on the sell side advisory services, they spend a lot of their days telling business owners who put blood, sweat, and tears into their business that, hey, bad news, it's not worth as much as you think it is. So here's where I want you guys to start taking action. The longer you delay fixing the things you know that need to be fixed, the more fragile the business becomes underneath the headline number. Let me say that again. The longer you delay correcting all of the systemic problems in your business, whether it's financial, operational, efficiency, productivity, systems, leadership, all the things that go into creating a very healthy business that creates consistent, predictable cash flow, the longer you delay those corrections, the more fragile the business becomes and the less options you have. So on the flip side, what is the disciplined operator doing? What can you start doing today? And that is treat EBITDA as a starting point, not the end-all be-all truth. Disciplined operators do not ignore EBITDA. I'm never saying ignore EBITDA, but they also don't make that the only thing that they're focused on. They treat it as a starting point for better questions. Questions like, does this EBITDA actually translate into strong cash generation? When you really start to understand how is cash consistently generated in a business, taking off your blinders, taking off your emotional attachment, and judging this with no bias, does this EBITDA actually translate into strong cash generation? How stable is this number over time? Is it predictable? Is it lumpy? Has it just started to actually get better? Next one is, what assumptions are built into this number? What are we actually assuming that is going on here that is creating this number? And the biggest probably one, in my opinion, is how much of this depends on me personally. If you got real honest with yourself, how much of the profit, the cash flow, the performance of the business depends on you? Again, not just from how much time you spend, but what takes you an hour might take somebody else 10 hours because you've been doing it so long. But how much of the decision making, how much of the actions, how much of the duct tape is actually relied and depending on you individually? If you ask Mike McAllowitz, he'll say, what happens if you take a 4-week vacation with no connection to your business at all? Is it still standing? And then lastly, if a sophisticated buyer looked at this today, what would they challenge immediately? Those questions and that mindset starts changing the conversation, probably starts giving you a little bit more long-term view of what do we need to do. Everyone's in such a hurry of, I want to get my EBITDA up and sell. I want to get this and sell. But the businesses that sell for the biggest multiple, the biggest life-changing dollar amounts, and make that transition successfully and still survive after the owner is gone, those are the businesses that have the patience, they have the longer view, because in this instant gratification world, a lot of times we're just trying to hurry up and get everything done, but we're not doing things the right way. Disciplined operators stop asking whether EBITDA looks good. They start asking whether EBITDA is durable, transferable, and believable. And once that becomes the standard, that's the key. Once it becomes the standard, the business usually gets stronger. It's not just more presentable on a slide deck. So in closing, if you've been using EBITDA as that proof that the business is healthier than it feels, slow down, take your time, pressure test that number, because EBITDA can tell the truth, but only if it's grounded in real economics, real discipline, and real transferability to a new owner. And buyers do not pay for the version of EBITDA the owner hopes is true. They pay for the version that they can trust, because let me tell you, once they start doing due diligence, They will figure out if this EBITDA is true or not. So stop lying to yourself, take the time and build it the right way. Lastly, if this conversation resonated with you, head on over to the website, thebluecollaradvisors.com. There you can learn more about how we could work together. You can book a call if it makes sense, download my pricing calculator, and explore the show notes and additional resources. And if this helped provide that clarity that you're looking for in your business, you're exactly where you need to be. And I'll see y'all in the next boardroom briefing.